Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Unerased Book Club discussion. We're here with the facilitators of the Unerased Book Club and some AADL staff. And tonight we are discussing the play by Prince Gomolvilas, which is called The Brothers Paranormal. And before we start, we'll just give short introductions. My name is Lucy, and I work in the youth department at the library. I am a white female. I have shoulder-length brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black sweater and sitting in front of some watercolor paintings.
I can jump in. I'm Christopher. I also work at the Ann Arbor District Library, and I have short brown hair and glasses.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I work for Ann Arbor District Library in the Outreach Department. I am a 28-year-old male with shaved sides on my head. I'm wearing a blue hoodie in front of a white wall.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I also work at the Ann Arbor District Library in the archives. I am a 32-year-old white female. 31 actually, 32 this year. Getting a little ahead of myself already. And I have glasses and my hair is pulled back. I'm in front of a white wall, sort of.
Hello, my name is Amanda. I also work at the Ann Arbor District Library. I work in the youth department. I am a middle-aged white female with shortish dark brown hair, brown glasses, and a dark green library sweatshirt. And I'm sitting in front of a white wall and a blue couch.
Hi, folks. I'm Fatema Haque. I am a co-facilitator of Unerased Book Club. I use she, her pronouns. I am a brown South Asian woman. I have a digital background of pink clouds.
And hello, everyone. My name is Sheela. My pronouns are she, her. I am also a co-facilitator of Unerased Book Club and the founder. I'm a light-skinned brown woman, also South Asian descent, with shoulder-length black hair and a virtual background of Adam's Peak in Sri Lanka behind me. And I'm very excited to talk about this play. I do want to give a quick summary for those who haven't been able to read it yet. It is a play that has about a runtime of about an hour when performed on stage, and is a exploration of the paranormal and family trauma with two main family casts, one that's Thai and one that's Black. And I think that should quickly summarize the high level of the context of the play. But before we started recording, Lucy and a few others are saying how excited they were to talk about this. And I just want to open it up to others to start exploring what they liked or disliked about a play, which is the first one we've ever read for the book club.
Well, I'll start.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Amanda. Go. I know we're both excited, so you go.
Well, I was just going to also a little bit of what Elizabeth said. I haven't read a play in a long time. I think since J.K. Rowling's The Cursed Child. So it's been a while, and I wasn't excited about reading a play then. But I was excited. The word paranormal in the title, I was like, oh, yes, please. I want to read about whatever that is. Ghost story, yes, please. I was very curious. I didn't realize the book was so slim and there was so little to it, but so much to it at the same time. So that was my initial, and I was very excited. I've read it yesterday. I only read it once, and I wish I would have read it twice because of what happens. Did anybody else read it more than once just to go back and reabsorb? And
I did, and I think that's one of my favorite things about it is like all these surprises come along in it. And then when you read it again, you're like, oh, it was there all along. Like it's so well crafted and masterful the way he put all that in there. And so I loved it.
I did not get a chance to read it a second time. I was hoping that I could find some sort of like recording of a production, but that's definitely not out there as far as I can tell. But yeah, I would like to reread it just because, yeah, like everyone's saying, there's all these surprises and twists that you're not really expecting. But like Lucy said, it probably like when you reread it, you'd be shocked that it was there all along.
When I got to the end, I was immediately reminded of something that several AADL staff members had watched, which is a South Korean movie called The Tale of Two Daughters. And I thought it was very reminiscent of that. Not that anyone copied, but I thought it was an interesting comparison for me to think about.
I mean, tangentially to that point, in the first scene, the younger brother recounts a story to the potential clients, and it's a story that's ripped from a Thai thriller. Mm-hmm. So I like that there's that little commentary of what is copying. Is it copying if the person you're telling the story to has no other cultural context clues?
Mm-hmm.
And as somebody who is a big horror fan, I appreciated the nods to horror movies, horror tropes, and especially Asian horror movies, and kind of how white people perceive them and the stereotypes that come with that. Mm-hmm. Like the image of, you know, the Asian girl with the hair in front of her face. And mm-hmm. So it was really interesting to see how this particular playwright played with those pieces, if you will. I was also reminded of course, The Sixth Sense, which was written and directed by an Asian man as well. So I was like, I'm a big Sixth Sense fan, and I loved rewatching it. So I want to reread it to get that same kind of feeling. Yeah. But yeah, no, I loved it.
I'll just say one more thing I love about reading plays in general, but this play specifically was I think when you're reading plays, you get to read the stage directions, which is always so interesting to me, because when you're watching a play, you obviously aren't even aware that they've been instructed to do this, but they're so specific mm-hmm. in this play and so crucial for the story to unfold in the way that it does for the most part. But then there's some stage instructions where it's like, perhaps this music is playing, or perhaps, and I just... like the stage directions are one of my favorite parts of reading plays. So I feel like you're getting this little insider's look to how the whole thing is being presented. And
I think those are crucial when you're reading a play as though you were reading fiction to be entertained. When you're reading fiction, there's so much description to tell you where you are, maybe suggest how you might be feeling or how the characters are feeling. And we don't get that with a play unless there's like the off-screen, you know, the monologues, which a lot of plays have. But for this, I loved it because it gave you description of what was happening on the stage, and that would be directly related to the reactions of the characters that were on scene and speaking next. But for me, that was like, so I was waiting to read a little bit of a ghost story in those, you know, italics, just waiting for like, oh, this is going to happen, because they mentioned like the lights were dark, a light came on, and it's just your, because that was like how you got like the feeling, you know, versus like the characters' reactions or having that dialogue about it. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Lucy, because I too was very drawn into some of the descriptions and the.
Before we,
I just want to second that we got to be the directors of the play as we read it. I was like, you know, and that's a fun place to be as a reader. I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh, I was just going to mention what happened before we started recording. We were all discussing the format of a play, and I said that I generally don't like reading plays. So to unpack that a little bit, I think that it's a lot of what everyone's been saying of like, you have to read the stage instructions, and a lot of times plays aren't filled with those as much as this play was. So I found it very accessible as someone who's like a very visual person. So like all the description and novels is like what makes me understand what's happening. And plays, I'm like, oh, this dialogue is just floating around and I don't know what's happening. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really get that at all with this. So I really enjoyed it.
I definitely felt like it moved faster than other types of text, for sure. Just because the dialogue is so speedy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I read it very quickly.
Yeah, me too. I sat down and I was like, oh, I'll just read a part of it. It's really small anyway, but then I was like, oh, I'm done with it. It was great.
I'm curious, Amanda already answered this, but I'm curious, when was the last time anybody else had read a play?
I had to reread The Crucible to teach it to high schoolers, and it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult. But this is, I mean, I think when we're talking about a play like that and a play like this, it's two different things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no. The last time I read a play was The Crucible. That was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. Oof.
Yeah, I read a play. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Maybe probably like 2015, I think, because it was a Pulitzer Prize winning play called The Flick by Annie Baker. And it's the reason it sticks with me, and I'm so specific about remembering that I read it, is that it also had amazing stage directions. And in fact, one of the stage directions in that play like talks about somebody's heart breaking. And I just was like, I love that. So that was the last play I remember reading, but I loved it. So I think that's why I was so excited to read another one.
Sorry.
Okay. I read one last year. I reread A Doll's House because I was going to see the adaptation Nora at Doll's House. I think it's at the Arthur Miller Theater. And that one was the one where it's like they take the premise of the Doll's House, but then they have 3 different Noras in 3 different time periods. And so the way that they did that was really interesting. So I had read it going in knowing that I was going to see an adaptation, and I just wanted to remember the details, but it's been a while otherwise.
I got halfway through a play recently for another AADL program called The Bad Seed. It was very close to the novel that it was based on, but I found the stage directions to be overwhelming. There were so many abbreviations, things that I couldn't intuitively figure out, and that I had a lot of trouble picturing in my head. And I felt like that was too much for me. So this was really a pleasant departure, or it was something new for me to read with. I thought it had very sparse stage directions.
Yeah, the last time I think I read a play was maybe like the mid 2000s, maybe 2014 or mid 2010s, maybe 2014. I'm pretty sure my mom had picked up a like feminist play book from the my parents' home district library book sale, and brought it home. And I read it, and I realized, like as I was reading it, that it's cool to read plays that have been established or scripts that have been established and have been performed over and over again. But where are contemporary plays, and why are they so hard to access? And so this play came from a playwright repository of contemporary playwrights, and I'll pull up the name in a little bit. And it's like you can sort it by all these different indicators. Like, is the playwright queer? Is the playwright Black? Is the playwright from a specific part of the country, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think that's such a wonderful gift to have for exposing otherwise avid readers to a very different genre. And I'm very curious from library staff, what is it like to procure plays? Like, do people read plays from the library?
I know we have like a theater collection in the back. I don't know where it got moved, I think, but it used to be like hidden in the back of the second floor. And it would be very rare that someone would come and ask for it. And most staff didn't know where it was, like casual staff didn't know where it was. So it kind of got lost. I don't know if anyone has been working downtown a lot, could shed light on where it is or like how it's been used since, but I feel like it's pretty underutilized.
I feel like a lot of it was also Shakespeare, which is fine. The paperback theater collection, and it may have a different name at this point. But part of reading this play came out in 2019. Part of it for me was like how accessible it was and how little as a reader I go to seek out plays. You know, I want a display. For those of us who make displays at the library, we need to get this. Like, we need a an end cap with like a bunch of really accessible, good plays, just so they're in people's faces. There isn't a website you need to go to find the ones that you want to read. Mm-hmm. There's the ones that aren't Shakespeare or like the Crucible or whatever. Like, I want more, I want it to be easier to find ones that are like entertaining and fun and that hit on these cultural aspects of things people want to read about and talk about and like digest together, which is what makes me very excited to be here to talk about this, because there's so many things we haven't even unpacked yet with this little book. We're still talking about how plays can be cool, but also they can be. So plays, who knew?
And they're shelved in nonfiction for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
just like poetry.
Yeah, they're with poetry.
I know. I think it's funny that they're in nonfiction. Well, we had to get copies of this play for the library based on your choice of it, and we ordered a few, and they were circulating. I mean, they were checked out. So it's good to be getting those plays on the shelf.
Yeah, I had to be on the wait list, so I was very excited.
I know, and that's exciting.
So I'm just like thinking now about the potential of having maybe like having plays more visible in libraries and potential for readers theaters virtually, and like having a reason to talk to, like, interact with your friends or with like people who are interested in reading plays who you may not know, and as a community building activity. Just because like I remember in elementary school we had like quarterly readers theaters, and I was like, no one's doing this after 5th grade. This is ridiculous. But you're right, Amanda, like, why not promote plays and like contemporary writing? Mm-hmm. And the name of the repository that I pulled this from is New Play Exchange, and it's a repository of all living playwrights.
Ooh. I really wished I was like doing a table read with a group of people with this play, because I remember that was one of my favorite activities from high school, because our teachers would make us read, you know, the Shakespeare mostly, like in that way. So definitely wish I had that, just to kind of see how it flowed.
Yeah, and I think too, and I haven't taught in forever, but if there are like, even like I took a ton of English classes in high school, and then even as a lit major in college, like I read a lot of the classics plays, and I feel like it would be neat to have these fun, accessible, strange, like current popular culture, like you're mentioning, like the X-Files, and you know what I mean? It's more accessible than like, hey kids, we're reading Shakespeare. Not to knock Shakespeare again for the second time tonight, but it just gives plays this different light that to show young people or of any age, like, hey, these can be enjoyable to read for fiction, you know?
I'm glad to knock Shakespeare. Go ahead and keep knocking Shakespeare. He'll manage.
He'll do okay.
In my college, I had to take a summer class, and it had to be a 400 level. And of course, Shakespeare was all that was available. And I got like a C or a C+ in that class. I'm holding grudges. It was hard.
So I'd love to start unpacking some of the content, because this play is full of lots of different content, whether that's the after effects of Katrina or mental health things. So I'm just curious about what stuff resonated for you. And let's start talking about it.
One thing you mentioned, Katrina, and I was thinking about the idea of migration, and you know how Felix and Delia had to leave New Orleans, and it's also this interesting parallel with migration from life to death, I think, and that like there are these ghosts who sometimes they're there because they're not ready to move on, but I think sometimes they're there because the people who they left behind aren't ready for them to move on. And I just think that's an interesting way to layer different types of migration.
Mm-hmm.
And just to echo what Lucy had said, I'm kind of, you read the play and you go, now what the heck was that all about? You know, what was being said? And the one phrase that came to mind is like, this is about crossing over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, I didn't put the word migration, but that's clearly the word. But I said this is about, going from A to B and the trauma that's involved with that.
I think there's also kind of the implication that like once you cross over, you can't go back because the couple doesn't ever get to go back to Louisiana at all after Katrina, and in the end, mild spoiler, when the two ghosts go into the tunnel, that kind of signals they're gone forever and they're not coming back.
And also, the youngest brothers, I'm trying to remember his name, Max. He says like, "Oh, I haven't been back to Thailand. I've never been back." And his parents couldn't go back, and that also is like I feel like a good parallel in this theme of migration. What does return look like? Who says you can't return? Not like all the other barriers that could exist, but like the self-imposed idea of who can and cannot return.
I thought it was really curious to see the theme of gambling so prevalent. And that was such an interesting comparison between the two families. And I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, I did like the mother's story talking about the funerals and being like a casino, because that was what would draw the people to stay there for that long of time period, which I thought was really neat. And I did like that. It kind of gave them something in common with the family he was helping, especially towards the end, because she was migrating with this giant like slot machine. Like that's a big physical burden to carry along with you, with your other like emotional and monetary burdens you're carrying along with you across the country. So I liked that tied them together, especially at the end. But just that theme through the book of those two things, like just a positive thing. Not that a funeral is a positive thing, but just something within their culture that they both carried in different ways for different reasons.
Yeah, the idea of having company in grief, whether it's company for the ghost themselves or the deceased themselves or for the survivors. I mean, I think the image that I'm so familiar with here in America, at least, is loneliness in grief, right? A loved one passes away and you notice their absence and everything. That's how it's demonstrated in film, all the places they're not. But in this case, it's just like you have a house full of people and it is an extended wake and it continues on. And there's incentives for people to be there, but there's also that greater incentive of like, you have company for a while. And I thought that was really touching. And I was like, that is really cool. I feel like we could all use that to degrees. Yeah.
I loved how many different commonalities between cultures that we don't normally think of having similarities came up in this play. And again, it's a very short play. And I felt like the playwright did such a good job of digging deep into both like the seemingly superficial and the incredibly like in-depth ideas that are ingrained in culture to bring out those commonalities. So not just like the gambling, but this idea of ghost stories and believing in paranormal as a natural part of, or like an extension of life, and not something that is could potentially be something that you're mocked for believing in.
Yeah, and when the brothers were eventually investigating or trying to debunk the couple where the wife was seeing the ghost, one of the things that the husband was saying when the wife was making her wonderful coffee in the other room, I love the coffee bits throughout this, but one of the things he said was that she thinks she's seeing something. So you need to find that ghost, because if you don't see the ghost too, that means my wife is going insane and we can't have that. So please, you need to say that she's seeing something, which I just thought that was really a dear way to see what he was internalizing as far as his wife and her mental health and what that could mean for her and like their shared life together.
Yes.
I also think you bring up, oh, go ahead, Jacob.
No.
I was just gonna say, with Amanda talking about like worrying about the wife suffering from mental illness, I just think it brings up this sort of parallel between the paranormal and mental illness. And I've seen it in other things as well. And I think it's just the idea that you're like being haunted. And it's interesting if you look at the mother in this story and you realize she was like schizophrenic. And I mean, there are a lot of ways like you can be depressed, you can suffer from mental illness, and in a way that could be a haunting, you know, something that is sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but in the same way that the paranormal can be. And I think of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And I think there's a lot of that in that story too, where it's like, is it mental illness? Is it the paranormal? And who's to say it has to be one or the other, you know? And I think that comes up a lot in this story.
I was going to say exactly that, and you said it so much better.
Oh, no.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's so true. I've also been thinking similar things. I've been learning a lot about dementia as of late, and just the fact that our brains shift and change, and we start seeing things that are not there anymore, and that the process is really for two groups of people to bridge the gap between what they're experiencing when it's inherently different experiences. Like as I was reading this, I was actually I was bawling for a good chunk of it, because of this is the struggle, is to kind of merge the realities and be able to communicate across those differences in perception. What's actually visible versus not. Just absolutely fascinating.
And
no, go ahead, Amanda, please.
I was just going to say that I think it's amazing that the writer was able to fit so much of that. Plus, there were parts of the story that were funny. There's a major couple of twists in it. So I just think it's wonderful that it just shows the talent and craft as a writer to write a play where there are stage directions giving you information, but it's through the dialogue that you are presented with so much information, and it's a lot. And I don't know how he was able to do that so well in such a short work, to bring in all of those things, the cultural implications, the mental illness, the migration, and then there's these funny bits of pop culture, and then you have this ending and you're like, wait, what? How was that in like 85? What? Yeah.
I was going to say, the link between the paranormal and mental illness. There's so many cultures that ascribe mental illness as being a paranormal experience, which I think at face value, it might, or like with a Western lens, it might seem like, oh, you're devaluing or you're not taking seriously mental illness, but really it can also be interpreted as this is a coping mechanism in cultures where you don't have to necessarily diagnose every little single thing, and you can just like accept this part of a person as like that's their existence, and here's an explanation that doesn't place fault on them either.
Mm-hmm.
This play uses the paranormal and mental health as themes to kind of expose things about those two things, and I think it goes a third way too, between the paranormal, mental illness, and grief, and how those states, or that's not the right noun for them, but how those things are interrelated and surprisingly similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what was striking for me was how much like Max was carrying it with him, right? So his brother and his mother, and their presence with him the entire time. And you kind of get the sense of like how tangible grief can be at times when you're so immersed in it. And then the conversations he has as a result of it, both about how things happened and, what the toll on him was as a result of having to carry all of that. I thought that was a beautiful representation of the heaviness of grief.
It seemed to me that there were quite a few pages devoted to just coffee. Mm-hmm. And not everything has to mean something, but I've come to really look for meaning with works or authors that I respect. So it must have been a purposeful choice. It could have been as simple as this is a comforting, cross-cultural thing, but maybe it represented something more.
That makes me think that maybe it's something to do with like migration and movement and all of the steps that coffee has to go through, because it was, I think, like very specifically mentioned where it came from. And so just reading that, you're like, oh, whatever. Yeah, coffee comes from different places out there in the world. But like each coffee has a specific origin and a chain of labor that gets it there. And oftentimes that's not a very equitable or humanitarian process.
That's why I asked. I missed that.
Fireworks in my brain. Oh my gosh.
Well, I did think about it when the wife was telling the story about, I think, was it when her husband was in the hospital, about how they would chew on the cherries that would grow on the coffee trees and spit them out. And perhaps that's how they traveled and made it to other places. So I'm like, they're still talking about coffee. This is meaningful in some way. It's not just to make me excited and thirsty for coffee. So I really, again, another thing that you can put in this small little compact piece of fiction, and it's meaningful. It's meaningful.
I was wondering, like, based on the description of this particular coffee, and it's like more sandy in texture, or I got the sense that it was like you had to wait for it to settle a bit. And I think that's also how coffee is made in Thailand and the Philippines, right? Where it's just like you get this like murky, almost muddy-ish mug, and you wait for it to settle enough, then you drink it. So I thought that was an interesting like crossover, even in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the coffee symbolism feels very similar to the Ella Fitzgerald symbolism, where it kind of seems like a throwaway cultural reference that speaks more to like those two characters, but really has, again, like this playwright does such a good job of finding relationships within the play through a piece of culture. Yeah, I don't really have much more to say on that. I really liked it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And that the Ella Fitzgerald recording was something beautiful that came out of a failure. And that's exactly how grief feels too. How do I make something worthwhile out of this terrible, awful, most worst thing ever? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And since with that symbolism, when the record was smashed against the wall later on, I was like, I feel like I animated that record, and that when it like fell apart, I was just like, oh no, that's upsetting.
And I really want to see this staged because you can get a sense of like the scary parts when you're reading it, but I imagine seeing it would be really scary, and that would be a really interesting experience in a theater. So it's in Alaska though. That's far.
And difficult to put on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody hears of it coming anywhere closer to Michigan, please let us know.
I know.
Yeah, I spent a bit of time trying to look for interviews or, well, I mean, video or print. Nothing. And that kind of goes to show how few communities are equipped to produce plays or to have like the journalism to promote plays. And I know like in Southeast Michigan, there are a few repertories or like play stages. But even beyond that, like I would never know how to find those plays when they're actually performing. And it just kind of sucks. Like I would love to go support local theater. I just don't know how to do it. And I try very hard to like tap into those communities or like tap into the media that should cover that.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like in the past 2 years, some of the places you may have gone to have seen those works are not existing anymore.
Yes. And especially when mainstream theater is kind of predicated on the idea of being exclusionary. Like we all can't shell out $250 to go to the nosebleeds to see Hamilton. I really don't want to, but that's neither here nor there. So it makes you really reframe, you know, how do I want to engage with art when that art is best engaged with locally? I was like, I'm about to go see a play or something, dang.
Well, may I recommend the Encore Musical Theater in Dexter? I do enjoy that space, and every seat is a good seat.
Yes.
Yeah, I also saw some good plays at the Ann Arbor Civic Theater pre-COVID. And, you know, honestly, like a lot of high school productions can be really, really good. And I mean, the musicals, but also like if you can find a high school doing a smaller play, like I have seen some of those that have just blown me away. So yeah, you're right, Jacob. It's not always the big, very exclusionary Broadway stuff.
Yeah, and I think the most plays that I've seen recently in town have been plays put on by like K through 18, like through the Young People's Theater here in Ann Arbor. And that was only because I was related to somebody who was in the plays. But even after she like moved away, I still wanted to go see those plays because they were phenomenal productions. These kids put their heart and soul, and they were visually, they had people flying in bikes across the stage. Like they were so well done. And it made me want to be a theater goer to see those plays done at that company, even without anybody I know. And I feel like when people say, I'm going to see a play, like what, who's in it? Is your niece in it? Is your grandma in it? You know what I mean? But again, it's that negative, not negative, but this like interesting multi-level like connotation with like, oh, it's a play, you know, which I think needs to go away. Boo, go see a play, read this book, get it from your library, talk about it.
I don't know if anyone else saw, there were some trailers that were released for one of the productions
on YouTube.
Like, yeah, there's like 4 parts, and I watched them, and I was just thinking like, yeah, I would love to watch the whole thing, but it just made me think about the music, like what it would be like to watch it with music and the lights and all that, and just like Lucy was saying, like how much more scary it would be. And I definitely got the sense of like impending terror at times when I was reading it, but I think it would just be so much fun to see it live.
Yeah, I listened to an interview with the playwright, and he said that there were some showings of this play where people got like walked out during the scary part, and he doesn't see that as a bad thing. He's just like, that's how scary it was to them, and that's intriguing to me.
It was 65 degrees yesterday or 71. I read this book in my yard. It was beautiful, daylight, sunny, and I was like, like with the twist and things are happening that I didn't see any of that coming. I'm, I guess, a dumb reader. But it was just like I was taken into this dark place, and then I had to like stop myself and look around and hear the birds chirp. I'm like, okay, it's daylight, it's 70, okay, and then go back to the dark place because it just sucked me right in. It sucked me in. It was very well done.
This is very interesting because I think in the back of the book it's described as like a comedy. Like I kind of read it as that. I did not quite feel captured by the horror in quite the same way. I was just like, oh, this is very snarky at times. Everybody's pulling everybody else's leg.
Like I definitely picked up on that too, but maybe it's just because I'm like a a person who's scared of most things easily.
Yeah, I guess for me, it wasn't the spooky horror moments. It was more like an, oh, snap, what? Like, I just couldn't believe, I'm like, wait a minute, Then I would go back and be like, oh, there are ghosts. Like, that kind of thing was more my reaction. Because I'm kind of desensitized to horror in print or in television.
Yeah, I definitely thought parts of it were funny and then scary, but then also, like, I think, Fatema, you were saying before, like, you were crying. There were parts that were just really sad too. So again, this is a really short play and it took us like through all of that. So
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
I was not prepared for the tears. That was not where I was like, gonna go. I was like, okay, I'm gonna read this in an afternoon. No.
Because essentially, I mean, the book it's a lot about grief. It's a lot about grief and grieving and how we take care of or ignore like ourselves when we are grieving. And if we are grieving multiple people at the same time, it's difficult. And that's what I appreciated about the end, was watching these two humans who were grieving. And I was like, wait a minute, that's unreal. They're not going to go off and live together. But it just made sense that these two humans needed another human in order to like handle and deal with the day-to-day basis, their day-to-day life of their grief and their loneliness.
And I think that horror is the perfect, oh no, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and that's the big horror. So,
and I think that horror is the perfect vehicle to kind of address these feelings of heightened emotion. And I think that that's why also comedy is kind of a really wonderful way to address heightened emotion as well. The same feeling that I, like, if I'm watching a scary movie and I'm about to scream, that's the same feeling I have when somebody tells a really funny joke and I'm just busted cutting up laughing. Mm-hmm. And that might sound crazy, but it's really how I feel. And I think that laughter and that feeling of being scared, those heightened emotions allow artists to explore things like other heightened emotions like grief, despair, betrayal, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I see how all these different ingredients are work together. Although if you saw them before you put them in the pot, they wouldn't make much sense. Mixing my metaphors left and right.
What did you all think about the end where the slot machine keeps paying off over and over and over? Sorry, I just jumped in with my own question.
No, love it. Please.
It was a question I had as well.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about it. And the other curious part of that is that there were no payoffs until I think Max put a coin in. Is that right?
In the notes, there's a whole order of who gets paid off when, like in the little notes, the stage direction. For me, I thought it was a hugely positive thing for Delia because there's the story of her being unlucky. And then she's like, oh, maybe I'm lucky after all. So I like that turn of events because it meant for me that even though she had to leave Katrina and she has been unlucky and has lost money time and time again, she lost her husband. Now she's found a little bit of solace. And even if it's just quarters out of this like slot machine, that it's unbelievable that she still has it with her. For me, it was just this positive thing of like, hey, maybe there will be a sunny side to things. I'm not going to be alone. I can get through this grief. Maybe my luck will change. But I don't know why they kept just spitting them out and spitting them out. I can't. Who knows?
Is this the slot machine that they had rigged for her mother to keep her inside the house and not going? Yeah. So I think like maybe it's symbolism of just the spirits above or ancestors looking down on you, and it's something's going to be okay. It may not feel like it now, but something will pan out. Jacob, you made a side earlier of how the Crucible and like plays like this are just so fundamentally different. And I have my own theory, but I would love to hear what you meant by that.
I think that the Crucible and I'm shocked to this day that it is taught in high schools. The way that it is written would never make anybody fall in love with reading. And I'm like, this is something that you could give to a young person or any person who has never read a play, has no experience with the theater, and they would go, maybe I kind of want to know more about plays, or maybe I want to go, see a little something performed live. Mm-hmm. That is not the case with the Crucible. The Crucible, you can't get past Goody Proctor. Like it was just like 30 students calling each other Goody and then our last names. And I was like, well, that was a fun class, So that's the first fundamental difference. I also think that because Arthur Miller is in the canon and is the playwright, we have different expectations, and expectations that are ultimately useless. What do you think?
I mean, I'm just thinking about how, because television is a script too, movies are scripts, and how readers are so used to seeing the final adaptation of, or a final adaptation of a script, that they're able to better read scripts that are kind of in line with that way of understanding. And obviously plays before television just don't have that same cadence. And that's why like Shakespeare can be hard to read, or Arthur Miller, or who wrote Edward, I can't think of his last name right now, but who wrote Who's Afraid? Yes, Albee. Which can be a little bit more difficult to read. Mm-hmm. I think like that is also a big cultural disconnect. And it's, again, why I think contemporary plays are so much more interesting to deconstruct, because many of us are so used to thinking about it as visual culture.
And then listening to you, an idea came to my brain, and it's also when we're reading the Crucible, we're reading Shakespeare, we go, this is for fancy people. This isn't for me. This is for fancy people. And I think that that's so much is built around, this is a whole other tangent. But I think that what reading contemporary plays can do, or what it has done in a small part for me, is that it reminds me that it's, I don't want to say fancy people again, but it's not just for fancy people.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was trying to read Shakespeare in high school, I'd be like, I have no idea what's going on. These words, like all these words put together, come out meaning nothing to me. And seeing it performed like in a video, obviously it makes sense. But I think just like the difference in language is so profound reading Shakespeare, if it's not like modernized in any way. Mm-hmm. And then it's just so dry. So, the imagery is dry, the language is dry, everything's dry.
And oh my gosh, the language is so dry. I didn't like Shakespeare until somebody said to me, there's trashy Shakespeare too. And there is trashy Shakespeare. Titus Andronicus is just trash. Now I was going to say something actually meaningful, and then I forgot it because I was thinking about Titus Andronicus. Okay.
Well, we needed that comment, so thank you anyway.
A sacrifice.
Very much on theme with knocking down Shakespeare today.
Yeah. Well, part of it, I think, too, goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of like having a modern play that has meaningful and interesting information that can be so thoughtful and wonderful in such like a densely packed like lines of dialogue where you're getting all your information from the words people are saying. And like, I haven't taught in years. I haven't been a student in years. So I want to know what other modern plays are on the library shelves. Like what other modern plays are people like studying in school, not just the kids that are in the drama club performing those, down the street at the theater. Like what else, like what is accessible? Like I don't know enough information. So reading this book made me think, what is it out there? What other plays do I want to read? Because I put my past knowledge of like, the 90s and the 2000s when I was reading these things because I had to, because I was teaching them, or in a class, whether it was college or high school, like I was basically forced to read like the Shakespeare and the Herman Miller. And that's what plays, quote unquote, were, because that's what was put on the table and handed to me as a child or as a teen, as a 20 something trying to teach, elementary students. it's just so, for me, that was one of the big takeaways, was the content of the book, how well it was crafted in such a slim piece, but also like, plays. Like it's interesting.
I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't read the play before I put it on our list for this year. So I'm really happy that it was good. Because that's the thing, like it's a repository of all plays. That means it could run the gamut. It could be anywhere from trashy to brilliant, and this was brilliant.
Well, and I think it goes with the theme of a lot of the titles that we've discussed or that you have presented on the wonderful lists that I've been aware of the past year. The characters and where they came from and their migration and being in a new country, that kind of thing totally fits in. It's just put in this horror comedy format. So it was also interesting to think about those sorts of things within a different context of the way that the writing was.
I was curious if anybody else had read anything else that he's done, because I was reading about him and it looks like he has like a really extensive body of work. And then this is one of his newer ones, but he started in the early 2000s and has done a lot.
No, I haven't. There's one other of his newer plays I think you can get where you can get this play, but the other ones I think they're hard to. At least I was trying. It's hard to dig them up. I know he's done a lot with students too. He created like a whole series of plays for younger kids, which is great when you think about it in light of this discussion of like, how can you get people interested in theater and drama earlier. But I would like to read more of his. I think I listened to some podcasts, and I don't know if anyone else, he did this TED talk called Mind the Gap. I highly recommend watching it. It's like 10 minutes long. It's from 2013. It's really funny. He is really funny. So I hope that I can find more of his to read. And I'll let you know if I do.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested if you find stuff. I'll try to check out that interview.
It was good. I watched it earlier today.
That feels like a good natural stopping point. I'm so glad that you all liked this play, and it's actively renewing the initial interest I had about joining the new play exchange in reading more playwrights, because now I'm like, oh, like these are good. I'll download more and read more of them. So thank you all for that inspiration.
Well, thank you for choosing this. I mean, once again, I feel like you've put something in front of me that I wouldn't have found on my own, that I really am so glad that I read. So thank you.
And it was so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
So next month, we're reading Trick Mirrors by Gia Talenti. It's a collection of essays. So really hope that you can join us for that. And of course, everyone, our listeners are welcome to join us at our Unerased Book Club. They're open to everyone. We really just want to get more readers like yourselves to read Asian American authors and kind of experience the vast range of experiences and ideas and thoughts that are out there. So hope that you will join. Cool. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.